Welcome to the Tales of American History, the Witnessing History Education Foundation podcast, educating Americans to understand the history of their country and of other countries so that they will appreciate the value of America's unique free institutions. Take a journey back through time with Kent Masterson Brown and his guests, and let their storytelling transport you to the most compelling moments in American history. Become an American hero who participates in our mission by joining us at witnessinghistory.org. Download our documentaries and free teacher education materials that conform to grade-level education standards at pbslearning.org. Follow Witnessing History on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Well, I'd like to welcome Wayne Motts from a place we're both very familiar with, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to our podcast here. Wayne, welcome.
Well, thank you, Kent. It's a real honor to be here with you.
Wayne, besides being a 30-year veteran licensed guide on the Gettysburg battlefield, is the chief executive officer of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Wayne, tell our viewers a little bit about that museum. What if you walked into it from the front door, what kind of things would you see? What kind of things does it house? And let them know a bit about it.
Well, thanks, Kent, very much. So the National Civil War Museum is headquartered in the state capital of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg. It's 39 miles north of the Gettysburg battlefield. It is a tremendous facility, 65,000 square feet of space. It's one of the largest museums in the country for this genre. And the museum houses, I think, one of the finest collections of Civil War artifacts anywhere in the world. So it has about 4,000 three-dimensional objects and about 21,000 archival objects, items, including paper, photographs. Mm-hmm. And we do the war from the beginning to the end, start to finish. There's about 30,000 square feet of educational space inside the museum. So when you walk in the door, you see a house divided, the causes of the American Civil War. You go right into the slavery issue. You go into the first shots, into the training of the armies, into all the campaigns. Right. And then it has some unusual things, which I'm really proud of. And I think those don't get a lot of attention anywhere else. So these would be the medical aspects of the Civil War, women in the Civil War, prisoners, immigrants, African-American troops, music. We've got a whole display on music in the Civil War. Wow. So when you come visit this museum, you get the entire Civil War in a nutshell, and it really gives you the great context when you go visit Gettysburg or the Wilderness or any of these other places. The context is set there for you.
Yeah. Isn't that neat? Let me ask you, are there any special areas of that museum to you that you like the most? Yeah,
well, it's so first of all, I'm a person that all my life have been interested in Civil War. My family started a military museum. Ken, I tell everyone I took things to show and tell that Homeland Security would jail you for today. You'd go to jail for the things that I took to show and tell. Luckily, the principal said, it's just Wayne, forget about it.
It's harmless.
It's there. So all my life, I've been interested in artifacts and objects. My father had a set of diaries that belonged to a Civil War soldier killed at Fort Wagner, and he used to read those to me when I was a child. They're still in my family's possession. They've been in their possession for over 60 years. So for me, I was Willy Wonka handed the keys to the chocolate factory. That's the best way I can describe it. So every area of the museum I enjoy and I like. I especially like the arms and armament and weapons and dress of the Civil War soldiers because I think people often don't understand what does the uniform look like, what do the soldiers carry. I like that. I like our Lincoln Gallery. I have a special gallery related to Abraham Lincoln. And one of the things I'm most proud of is when you come into that museum, and the museum was constructed in 2000, opened up in 2001. It's been around for 18 years. You are addressed right up front with the causes of the Civil War and the slavery issue. And I think that the National Civil War Museum may have been one of the first museums to put that right at the fort. What historians have known for a
Yeah.
century and a half,
Yeah.
but put it in the forefront to the education of the Civil War.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty proud of the, and we had scholars, of course, and people advise us on that content.
Sure.
But as
sure.
CEO, I'm proud of how that's presented and the variety of it's presented and the depth of it and
Wow.
the comprehensiveness of
Wow.
what's there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, are there special relics you like in that museum?
Yeah, I have many favorites. I've got.
Tell us about a few.
So one of my favorites, which I just did a little Facebook video on ourselves for the museum, we have a diary in the museum that was carried by a soldier in the 12th Mississippi Infantry Regiment killed at the Mule Shoe. So this diary belonged to a soldier.
Spotsylvania
At
Courthouse.
Spotsylvania at the Mule Shoe.
Yeah.
And he was killed May 12th, I believe.
Yeah.
And the diary was taken by a Union soldier. So it's written in by this Confederate soldier. And in the second part of it, he started the diary May 19th, this Union soldier did, and he was captured and ended up in Andersonville. And he survived his captivity. But this diary is written in by soldiers of both sides
Is it that
in the
something?
Civil War and survived and tells the story of both of those. That's one of my favorite pieces.
Is it a 1-year diary?
It's not even quite a year. It doesn't. It's just it's a one
Yeah.
diary, and it starts in 1864. It has an accounting in the front of it. And I know you in your career have seen many of these diaries. Sometimes the soldiers write who owes them money or what they've
Precisely.
ordered. Yeah, and so that's in the beginning of this,
Yeah,
and part of
yeah.
it's in pen, part of it's in pencil.
Yeah.
And so we've tried to track down some of that, but that has to be. I like the things that are what I would say are the more common. So we have U.S. Grant Spoon, for example. We have a Bible carried by Robert E. Lee at the time of the American Civil War. Two swords owned by Jeb Stuart in the war. But the things I like are the common things. My friend Gary Edelman, who works for the American Battlefield Trust, he came out to visit me, and he was most impressed that we have a shovel with the leather scabbard and the shovel goes in. And he said, Wayne, I've seen thousands of photographs of those, but I've never seen one in the flesh.
I've never
real.
seen one.
And so in the museum collection, we have an archival document, which I have never seen. I've only read about it. A slave policy from Aetna Life for a slave in South Carolina. I've only read these things. I've never saw it. I've never seen one in person until I came to the museum. And we have 2 letters from prisoners where postage was paid by both sides. So there's Union and Confederate stamps, which you had to do in the Civil War. I've only ever read about it. I've never seen it until I came to the museum.
I've never seen anything like that at all.
So the things that are housed in the museum, in some cases, you read about them, but you don't actually see the live.
Yeah, I used to collect diaries because, one, I like to use them in my writing.
Sure.
Particularly diaries that, have never been used before in a publication. I remember one that I picked up years ago, and I think I got it at Gettysburg at one of those great shows, in the summertime. And it was a diary that was carried by a soldier in the 128th Pennsylvania Infantry at Antietam.
Mm-hmm.
And he fills it in all the way up until the morning of September 17. And from there on, and it's in ink, from there on it's in pencil, filled in by a Georgian who took it out of the Pennsylvanian's pockets. He was killed. Wow. And
same story like
same story, yeah. And that was just a gem to me for so long. And I used it in some publications. But I used to love to do that. You'd find these, and I had one from the 62nd Pennsylvania, I remember. And he was a captain. His name was Gardner. And I've been using it in my Meade book because it's some of the most graphic descriptions of the fighting in the wheat field you could imagine. So some of these are just amazing, just amazing. Continue. Besides the diaries, do you have any other ephemera like letters, soldier letters?
We have many of those things in the archives, and our job right now is to try to get them cataloged and get them transcribed using volunteer labor. Most people that come to the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg today, most of them come to see the museum, 99%.
Sure.
You can't call and say, hey, do you have this specific thing I'm working on? And we can show you that. But we're hoping to get some finding aids and get some of these things so you know if you're a scholar to come research at the Civil War Museums.
Right.
We have a phenomenal archival collection, manuscript archives, diaries, letters, and correspondence from the Civil War, and they're virtually untouched. They've not been used by anyone. Not because we don't want them to be used, but we want to get them in cataloged in such a way that people know they're there.
They know there.
And get a finding aid that's there. So we have a lot of that material, Kent, and almost all of it is unpublished. Almost all of it's never.
Oh, that's incredible.
Never
that's stuff I love. I just love that stuff. Well, tell me about uniforms. Do you have any? What kind of uniform? I know you have. What kind of uniforms do you have on display there?
Well, we have from frock coats to sack coats to the basic uniforms of the Civil War. We have some which are unidentified. We don't know who wore them during the war. But we also have some famous coats, and we have one that belonged to a Western Theater General, George Maney. He's buried in Nashville, Tennessee. We have General Maney's coat, and we have another coat that belonged to General George Sears Green. It's probably our most well-known frock coat that we have in the collection, and it's in wonderful shape. Wonderful shape. His coat is a Brigadier General, and
Wow.
So I would say uniform-wise, that's really nice. We just recently got a donation of some uniform pieces for the 114th Pennsylvania, which was a Zouave outfit unit.
Collis's Zouaves,
there for Charles H.D. Collis for the Zouaves. And what I'm trying to do, or what we've been trying to do, is we have all these things, but unless we get them on display, we don't have a lot of time to do research. So there's infinite amounts of research. So job security, and let's go to the archives and get service records and pensions, because there's a lot of personal stories we can get if we're able to get the research. Now, having said that, it's like the National Archives. You've got thousands of these things, and you have, time is required, of course, to get through there. The internet has made it easier with newspaper articles and getting service records and things of that nature.
This uniform of George Green, is it a Brigadier General's?
It is. It's a Brigadier General's coat. I think it's the same one. We believe it's the one that he wore in these actions, like at Cedar Mountain at Gettysburg. We have a photograph of that taken from the National Archives, and I believe it is the coat we have. It has the velveteen cuffs. It's the exact same coat that we have.
Well, of course, his actions at Gettysburg are nothing short of heroic. Meade had to strip everything away from the Baltimore Pike, the line of supply and communication of the Army, and George and his one lone brigade were left. And the guys spread them all out to try to occupy the same ground the whole daggone Corps did, and then got hit by 4 different Confederate brigades. And it called in reinforcements from elsewhere. One by one, these regiments come in, but he held them back. It's just a remarkable, remarkable thing. Well, tell me, what about Confederate uniform pieces?
Well, General Maney's uniform that I mentioned is probably one of the most well-known that we have. We have some items that belong to General Pickett, including a sleeve that he was wearing at Gaines Mill when he was wounded. We have a staff officer's coat. He died of disease. He's buried at Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. So we've got a couple uniform pieces. Confederate pieces are rare, as you know, than are there. But we also have some interesting, just regular uniform pieces that you often don't get to see. The different shades and colors of the uniform, different types of fabric that were made, especially for the Confederates.
Different shades and colors in both armies, weren't there?
Yeah,
I mean, really,
that's right.
It's both
so,
armies.
and I'm the chief executive officer. I think. And sometimes I'd rather be the curator, but sometimes I have to go down and ask Brett Kelly, our curator, some of these questions, Ken, because he certainly knows the collection much better than I do. I've been there 7 years, and I would spend every day looking at that if I could. He's been our curator really since before the museum opened, so he knows every piece really in his head. And we work on that, but it's fascinating when you see it.
I've seen the film clip of you and I think Gary Edelman with Alonzo Cushing's belt. Tell us about that.
So we have a belt in the National Civil War Museum, model 1851 buckle, regular brown belt. With the name A.H. Cushing, Alonzo Cushing's belt. And there's a photograph taken after the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862, which you're aware of. Yes. And if you download that from the Library of Congress and enhance that detail, you can clearly see he's got this eagle buckle. He's got a regular belt. And I think it very well could be our.
Is that the one taken in the East Woods with the artillery officers?
Yeah, that's correct. That's the one taken in the East Woods. And you would know much more about the history of that than I do. Yeah. But there's one taken on the porch, which is a different one, and I'm not sure he's wearing the same belt there. When you look at that, it looks a little different.
Yeah.
The
with
one where
Sumner's staff.
Right, which is a staff. So there's one taken out in the field, the one you're describing, and if you enlarge that photograph, you've got basically our belt, the belt that's in our collection, which is really neat. And it's got his name inscribed on it. And we actually put that on loan to the National Park Service a year or two ago when they had a display of Alonzo Cushing's Medal of Honor, of course, which President Obama awarded in 2014. And they asked us whether we would, the park, being they, if we would loan the belt, and they put it next to the medal. And it's my understanding the medal is going to be donated to Gettysburg National Military Park.
It is.
The families, if they haven't already done so, they may have.
Jessica Loring, who is the one who received the medal. Is a good friend. And she told me that when it was awarded, there were members of the family, you can imagine this, that began to kind of scrap over who would get it.
Yeah, right.
And she said, Kent, I thought about it twice, and I said, hell, it belongs at Gettysburg. So she just gave it.
That's nice. Yeah.
And what's neat is that that medal is 6 months out of the year is also displayed at West Point. Which is where he's buried. He was a graduate of the class of June of '61. Yeah. And I had a dear friend, General Richard Treffry. He's a lieutenant general, retired. He's now gone, I think. But General Treffry was very interested in seeing Alonzo get awarded that medal. And he was on the War Decorations Board.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he kept telling me, he says, Kent, when that medal is finally awarded, it really should go to West Point. And he says, and they could put it over the inner entrance to the library, so every cadet sees that. Oh. And he almost got his wish. Wow. Jessica gave it to Gettysburg, and Gettysburg loans it to West Point for a period of time, and then it comes back.
But so you get the best of both worlds, and it's preserved.
Absolutely, and it's protected.
Thing.
I mean, any one of the families anywhere would have one member who just wants to get something off of it. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Right.
So here it is. It's just fabulous. She's a wonderful lady.
It's great that you found a receptive person. I mean, for me as a museum person, we're thinking two things. One, it should be preserved.
Yeah.
And two, it shouldn't be preserved just so nobody has a chance to see it. It ought to be interpreted. It ought to be viewed, and people ought to be able to see it.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of these family collections, you know what happens. People die. There's disasters. There's divorces. There's all these things happen. And the stuff goes to the four winds. So it's wonderful that stuff gets preserved, should be, and interpreted at these places.
Absolutely. And, of course, for those listeners here, Alonzo Cushing commanded as a first lieutenant, Battery A of the 4th United States Artillery, 6 3-inch ordnance rifles at the Angle at Gettysburg. It was the focal point of the Pickett's division's attack against the Second Corps, and he was multiple times wounded before he was killed in that. And I'll tell you a story about when I was working on Cushing's life. I contacted a little county historical society in Chautauqua County, New York, where he grew up, and in Westfield, New York. And they told me, we don't know of anything we have here about him in particular. There are a few things in the public library in Fredonia, but we do have an old trunk upstairs that was a Cushing trunk. And you're welcome to come up and take a look. Well, I'll tell you, Wayne, That was a revelation to me, like on Friday afternoon around 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
So you're in your car at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Around 3 in the morning the next day, I'm getting out of the car in Westfield, New York, and I got to the old house where all this was, and they let me in, and I went up in the attic, and from the time that place opened, like at 8:30, until 3, all I found were just bits and pieces, and I was kind of getting discouraged, and I kept digging, and finally, at the very bottom of that trunk was a great big envelope, like a business envelope you used to see in the early. And this business was stuffed. And in pencil on the outside, it read, Alonzo's letters.
Oh, my Lord.
And there were 26 letters written by Alonzo Cushing from the time he was a second classman at West Point all the way up until 1 month before he was killed.
Wow.
And that's what I said. Hell, I could write about him now. I can make him talk. So he's near and dear to my heart. But I've never seen that belt in the flesh, and I want.
Well, you've got a standing invitation to come look at it, and we put it on display sometimes. Sometimes it's in storage. One time we didn't loan it down to. Obviously, with the items that we have at the National Civil War Museum, we're very cognizant of the fact that some of these are rare, especially the textiles. So some of these cannot be on display. People often, when they donate things to museums, they wonder, well, how come my thing can't be on display all the time? Why can't it just be out there all the time? And we have to remind everyone that these items have a shelf life, so to speak. And we want to make sure we rotate, especially these items that may be sensitive to that, in and out, back and forth. So we put some of these things on temporary exhibit, then we bring them back into storage, temperature, humidity controlled storage, and so that for generations we can enjoy these things, and not just for one generation of doing it. But sometimes it's hard for people to gather that, to understand that, and it's our job to try to educate folks about the interpretation of those items. We also have to preserve them so they can be interpreted and be around.
One thing I know collectors and people love to look at are presentation officers' swords, staff and field swords, line officers' swords. What notable ones do you have in your collection?
Well, we have one that belonged to Brigadier General Frank Wheaton. Wheaton was a brigade commander in the 6th Corps.
Absolutely.
This sword was actually given to him when he was the colonel of the 2nd Rhode Island, and it was given to him by his father.
Wow.
And it's a beautiful presentation sword. We have another one that belonged to I think it's Henry Landis. Landis was the brother-in-law of John Fulton Reynolds, and we have a presentation sword that that was given to him for the action at Oyster Point, and right outside where the museum is, when the Confederates came all the way up to across the river, and he had an artillery battery from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where he was from Philadelphia, where he was from Philadelphia, and this is inscribed with the battles and to him, and he's the brother-in-law of John Fulton Reynolds.
Oh, isn't that cool? Yeah, that's really cool.
That's a nice presentation sword.
That's really
that we that we have. We have some others. I can't think of the names off the top of my head, but we have others that are part of that.
Yeah, when I was on the Gettysburg Foundation board some years ago, I got a call from a relic dealer in Gettysburg who we all know, and he said, "I've got something here I want to show you." And I walked over there to the horse soldier and went inside, and up on the 2nd floor, he took me to a little vault. He opened the vault door, and out comes this chasseur kepi with a wreath embroidered with U.S. and 2 stars. Yeah, 2 stars. And then came out a lot of photography of a very young officer. And then came out an escutcheon, a post-war escutcheon with all the battle honors of whoever this person was, and it had John Fulton Reynolds. And I went, oh my heavens, and it was just a ton of stuff. Right. And I said, this is all of John Reynolds' things. And they go, yeah. I said, where does it come from? He said, it's the family. Yeah. And so do you think the Gettysburg National Military Park would like that? I said, I would certainly the hell hope so. Yeah. And so we managed to get that to happen. But Yeah, it's great stuff. As an old relic guy from way back, like I know you've been, I love looking at that. I love to go to museums. I love to see it all, and I'm really glad that we're here to share the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg with people here and who listen to this podcast. So I thank you for that, and thank you for coming here.
I appreciate it, Ken. We want to tell stories. There's no better way to learn about the Civil War than to tell stories.
That's right.
And make those personal for people.
That's right.
And so at the Civil War Museum, we're using these objects to tell a larger story through the eyes of a real person.
Right.
And for me at the museum, as a battlefield guide, interpreter of many years, as a kid interested in this, there's no better way to get people interested than tell a story.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's the best way to do it. It is the best way to do it. Well, you're also the co-author of a book called Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg, A Guide to the Most Famous Attack in American History. You and Jim Hessler have put this book together, and I got to tell you, it is a perfectly beautiful book. It's gorgeously published, and Ted Savas out there in California does gorgeous work. His maps are spectacular. And it's very easy to understand where you are in this book because of the way it's laid out in the maps. Tell me, what are you in publishing this guide? What are you trying to get to people who go out on the field and let them know precisely where events took place? Is that the whole motive behind this? Yeah,
so thanks very much, Ken. So first of all, let me just say I got to give kudos to the co-author, James Hessler, my friend of many years, a battlefield guide. Jim is what I call a closer. Me, I like to just piddle around with this stuff, and I think we would have still been waiting on it if it had been up to Wayne Motts to get this job done. So he and we work very well together. I would work with him on any project. It just I think did some nice suiting together there. Yeah. And of course, we've got to say Savas did a tremendous job as you said in the layout of it, and Steve Stanley doing the 31 maps, because this book is a guide and you need to have some spectacular maps to do it. And of course, Steve has been the map maker for American Battlefield Trust for many years. So these are first rate, and the book is in color, which I really like because you can lay some things out. Right. What we really wanted to do with this work is a couple things. We wanted to reach multiple audiences. So I think it would be unusual, first of all, to have a hardback book as a field guide. But we really wanted you to be able to take this thing out on the battlefield if you wanted to do that. But we also wanted to make sure that if you were at home, you could follow it and understand it with the maps and everything that are in there. Right. And we also did, which I'm really proud of, there's things called out, I guess I would say, just little sidebars throughout the book that are stories. Yeah. And each one of those sort of stand alone on top of the narrative. We were just pleased to be able to publish the first really ever guide to Pickett's Charge. I mean, no one else has ever done that.
No one has.
And it's if I dare say the most walked part of the battlefield, I think it is, even more really than Little Round Top. People walking that every day, the assault, the attack, and seeing the Union defense. We have 4 tours in here, so we don't forget that the Yankees had something to do with it this, as Pickett said.
That's right. Well, what's neat in it, you go through each of those tours, and, it begins on the Confederate side with the massing of all those field batteries preparing to open fire on the Union positions. And you got 175 guns that they've brought out there to open fire. And I remember Henry Slocum says he had never seen anything like it before in his entire life or since.
Right.
And but you and Jim lay out all the batteries, where they are by name on the maps and in the text. And so to begin with, people can literally walk that line along it really in front of Seminary Ridge all the way down to the Peach Orchard, laying out all those guns.
Yeah, and we had many a day. If you could have recorded our conversations, they wouldn't be pretty about how to lay out all those. And this is a micro study, it is, but we took great pride in getting the primary sources as best we could.
Right.
For the Confederate batteries, it's quite difficult because the Batchelder maps, basically an officer would come and tell John Batchelder, hey, this is, and in some cases the plaques are reversed of what some of the others are.
Yeah.
Even the armament for a couple of these batteries, what is it? We took great pains in looking at many, many primary sources to get to where we're at in the order of battle and which ones actually fired and which one didn't. And I think some people would say, well, that's a little too much. We just wanted it to be as comprehensive as we could make it.
Yeah.
We wanted it to be a go-to source. We wanted you to be able to pick it up and say, this is what these guys think. But more importantly, the footnotes that basically say this is where they got it from. So you don't have to take our word for it. You can take somebody else's word for it.
But then as you move along, you go to the attack of each element of this assault force. Pettigrews, Dorsey Penders, Isaac R. Trimble, and then pickets. And you pick up each one of them. So there are tour stops so that you see each one, how far they get, and then of course into the defenses, the Union defenses, and you follow the North Carolinians that. What farthest to the front at Gettysburg was the motto. I mean, I think they had it on their license plates for years.
Right. Who actually got the furthest and did they? And we know what the men of the 55th of Davis said.
Yeah.
It's probably the 11th Mississippi. When you look at it, but it's to me, it's a tremendous feat. I can't even imagine. I've read for years the description of that fire and what it was like to be there. And I just can't imagine being a person there thinking to yourself, the next step I take is going to be the last one that I ever take.
This is going to be awful. Yeah.
It's just for me, it's that human aspect which is important. We forget when we're moving these little numbers around or we're moving little pins around that these are people just like you and I.
Right.
And
they're just getting blown to bits.
Yeah, facing that is just tremendous. And so I like also what we did, which I'm very proud of, is we put some human interest stories in there, and we called some of them out in special call-outs, and we really tried to personalize some of those places. We one of my favorites, and you stop me if I'm going too much, Kent, but is a soldier in Cushing's battery, and we actually got a photograph from a dealer friend of mine of a soldier in Cushing's battery. Ansel Fassett was his name.
I remember.
And when we were doing research, Fassett's buried in the National Cemetery, and according to the records, he died on like the 13th of July. Well, I found a newspaper article researching in 1926 where this man claimed he was Ansel Fassett. He died in California. And so would the real Ansel Fassett please stand up? We don't know. And there's a grave over in the cemetery with this man. And yet there's an entire newspaper article where he said he lost his papers. He couldn't prove who he was. And and so there's more research to be done on that. And here is an unpublished photograph until we got a hold of it of this soldier, thanks to our friend who was a dealer of a young man in Cushing's battery, reportedly mortally wounded at Gettysburg, buried in the National Cemetery. Well, guess what? There's a body there, but I'm not sure his name is on it, but I'm not sure it's Ansel Fassett.
Wow, it's just incredible. That's to me, other than Frederick Fugger and Lieutenant Milne, I don't know of a photograph of anybody else out of that battery. I've never come across one.
And you would have been the person to see. I mean, when you're doing regulars, it's a lot more difficult to try to do some of these research.
It really is. I mean, there's so much less on them. And let's close this here, but by asking this. And all the times I've taken people out on the field of the Pickett Pettigrew attack, the question always comes up, wasn't this just suicidal? Why would Lee have ordered this?
Yeah.
What's your answer to that?
Well, my answer to that is it's the next logical step for the battle. So if we take a look at what's going on in the battle, first day the Confederates push the Union Army north and west of town, drive them south. Lee attacks on the second day. He still has momentum to make these assaults. So on July 3rd, I don't think it's going to be a question whether he's going to make an attack. He's not going to hand over this initiative and the momentum over to the Union Army. He's not going to do that. The question is where and how. It is Plan B. I always remind everyone, Pickett's charge, as you and I know it, is not what Robert E. Lee went to bed with on the night of July 2nd. No. He wanted it coordinated with Pickett and with Ewell's men on the north end of the battlefield. He didn't get that because the Union Army is going to attack over at the north end of the battlefield. Yeah. So he has to settle for Plan B. Plan B is thought out. It is talked about. And we also should know that unless you walk that, you really can't understand the attack because you're not under fire the whole time.
No,
There's undulations in that ground where you're protected.
Deep swells.
Yeah, and he wanted the artillery to be a major participant in that. And twice, in Robert E. Lee's own words in his official reports, one in July of 1863, one in January 64. Robert E. Lee had two reports, the Battle of Gettysburg. Twice he says it's the failure of the artillery is the reason why Pickett's charge failed. You don't have to take my word for it. You can take Robert E. Lee's word for it. He ordered that because it was the next logical thing to do, and he wanted it properly prepared. And I think the planning of it was, in order for it to be successful, everything had to go right.
Absolutely.
And, of course, unfortunately for him, fortunately for the Union Army, everything did not go right on that. But Thomas Osborne, he's 11th Union Corps artillerist, he said, look, I've seen many attacks in the Civil War. None of them had a hope of succeeding. He said, I was at Kennesaw Mountain, I saw it. But he said, Pickett's charge did. He said, I think it did. And I was, and I'm the Union artillerist. Had things been properly done, they weren't. So I think you just have to take yourself out of the 21st century mindset and put yourself back into the 1863 mindset.
I've often, when I'm out there talking with people, always like to remind them that on the second day, the attacks Lee launched against the Union left were so ferocious and fought over so viciously that he could tell by just looking at the casualties on the battlefield and those prisoners of war being taken to the rear, that he had virtually demolished the Third Corps, Union Third Corps.
Right.
He had virtually, not as much as the Third, but he had really mangled the Fifth Corps because he could tell. I mean, these reports are coming back. These guys are from the Fifth Corps. Here's some from the Third.
Right.
His people were telling him.
Right.
And that he had mangled at least one division of the Second Corps. And he knew as well that after the fighting on July 1, that he had taken out much of the First Corps and much of the 11th Corps.
So when you start adding up,
you start adding this up. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he could look at the wreck on the battlefield after the fighting on July 2nd. And so, like you, it is the next logical step for him. And born of the fact that he believed, I'm convinced, that he had wrecked that Union Army so badly that if he made a concerted effort against the center, he could break it.
Yeah. Well, I tell everybody, he's got a nice model he can look to, and he doesn't have to look but only 48 hours. Go to the attack on the Seminary, where he made a frontal assault against a heavily fortified position, stacked with artillery.
Correct.
And the Confederates came right through there and punched a hole right in that defensive work.
Absolutely.
It's not quite as wide as Pickett's charge, but Pickett's charge has more undulations of ground, more protection. His troops, they completely drove that wedge right in that Union line, drove it right off, and he's only got to look 48 hours to see it.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, he could look ahead. He could see the swales, and you could get an entire daggone division in those swales. And so now they're safer from enemy fire, and they're only going to get shell burst on them, but none of the direct fire. So there's a lot to be said for it, given all that, and which is what he would have seen.
Right, and I think we've got to throw a quick quick kudos out to General Meade, because let's remember the Federals put up a very staunch defense. They had a prepared defense there. And how do we know it was good? Because they ended up winning.
They won it. They won it.
They won.
That's exactly
so
right.
we have to give credit to the Union defenders there
absolutely.
that put up a tenacious defense there on July 3rd to match the bravery of the Confederates coming across that field.
Exactly. And the effective use of field artillery on the Union side too. I mean, they were striking them with explosive shells way out there in the fields, and it's a fascinating thing. Wayne, look at my friend. It's been a treat having you here, and I wish you all the luck in I love your book.
Well, thanks.
And I want you to tell Jim how much I love it too. With respect to the museum, I hope all our listeners get up to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and take a look at the collections you have up there.
And thanks for having me. And
bet.
Just let me say on that vein, they can go to the website, nationalcivilwarmuseum.org. They can go to Facebook and like us, follow us, do those kind of things.
Super. Wayne, you're a pal. Thank you.
You bet, Ken. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Become an American hero who participates in our mission by joining us at witnessinghistory.org. Download our documentaries and free teacher education materials that conform to grade level education standards at pbslearning.org. Follow Witnessing History on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.